When we think of the Middle Ages, we imagine a world ruled by rigid morality, a time when sex was whispered about in shame, where priests condemned even the thought of desire, and where purity wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. But history is rarely that simple. Behind the walls of stone cathedrals a stranger truth unfolded. Kings took mistresses, monks broke their vows, and peasants humble and poor still found love in the hay. So what was sex really like in the medieval world? Let's find out. But first, you might have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. 1. 5. In medieval times, abstinence was seen as a sacred virtue, a way to rise above the flesh and walk the path of saints. But doctors of the time warned, too much restraint could make you sick, or even kill you. Back then medicine followed the theory of four humans. A delicate balanced fluid ruled the body. And sex, it helped keep that balance in check. Suppressing desire too long was believed to cause headaches, restlessness, even death. And it wasn't just theory. King Louis VI of France took a vow of chastity during the Albigensian Crusade. He stayed faithful. He denied himself completely. But shortly after returning home, he suddenly died. No wounds, no illness. Many whispered that it wasn't war that killed him, it was abstinence. He wasn't alone. A Norman poet once claimed that during the siege of Acre, 3,000 men died in battle. But over 100,000 died from abstaining for the love of God. It sounds absurd, but that's what many believed. In Liege, Belgium, a newly appointed bishop vowed total celibacy. After just 1 month his body began to rebel. His genitals swelled painfully. He broke down mentally. People begged him to take a woman just once to save his life. He refused, and days later he was dead. To the church, abstinence was the highest form of purity. But to medieval medicine, denying desire for too long was unnatural, dangerous, sometimes fatal. So was sexual restraint truly holy, or was it a silent killer? This is only the beginning of the mystery. In the eyes of the church there were few sins darker than touching oneself. Masturbation wasn't just shameful, it was dangerous. It was demonic, a sign of spiritual weakness, a doorway to temptation. Medieval confessional guides were clear. They ranked masturbation among the gravest offenses, alongside sodomy, bestiality, even adultery. Some penances lasted 30 days, others 2 full years of fasting and prayer, just for a single act done alone in silence. But the body told a different story, and so did the doctors. In hushed corners of medical texts, physicians acknowledged what priests would not. That release might be necessary, not for pleasure, but for health. They believed the buildup of sexual energy, especially in young men, could be dangerous. It created pressure, overheated the brain, unbalanced the humors, and without relief, that pressure could destroy the body from within. So in certain cases, physicians prescribed masturbation, carefully, quietly, as medicine. But what happened when someone went too far? One story recorded by Albertus Magnus still echoes across time. A young monk was said to have struggled deeply with desire. Isolated, ashamed, he gave in, but not once. According to the tale, he pleasured himself 70 times in a single night, By morning prayers he was dead, his eyes damaged, his brain said to have shrunk to the size of a pomegranate. A grotesque warning. Even if the act had a medical reason, excess was deadly. And for women, the story was no less complicated. In cases where an unmarried woman suffered from what doctors called uterine suffocation, touching herself or being touched was sometimes allowed. By midwives, by healers, always in the name of treatment, never pleasure. It was believed that unreleased female essence could poison the womb, cause fainting, madness, even death. These acts were framed as necessity, but always shadowed by shame. Because in the medieval world, masturbation was never just physical. It was spiritual. It was a battlefield between flesh and faith. To touch oneself was to wrestle with angels, and often to lose. In the medieval world, knowledge was passed down by whispers, from grandmother to midwife, from healer to fine bride, and nowhere were those whispers stranger than in the world of sex. Imagine this. A woman, desperate not to become pregnant, sneezes violently after sex. That was no accident. It was a contraceptive method. One of the most common beliefs of the time claimed that sneezing immediately after intercourse could expel the seed. If that didn't work, she was told to jump up and down, again and again, hoping gravity might prevent conception. But it gets weirder. Some women rubbed peppermint leaves around their genitals, not for fragrance but to block entry. Others wore weasel testicles tied around their necks. A charm, a talisman, a symbol of fertility turned inside out. To us it sounds absurd, even grotesque. But in a time without science, superstition filled the gaps. These folk remedies were rarely written down. They lived in the mouths of women, in dark kitchens, in village huts, in secret. The church called them heresy, magic, even witchcraft, but they endured because people were desperate. And desire doesn't wait for permission. And it wasn't just women looking for answers. Men, too, feared the judgment of their bodies. In a world where virility defined manhood, insecurity was a silent plague. To be less than was to be shamed, to be small, unworthy. So they searched for cures, most of them ridiculous. Some rubbed warm sheep's milk on their genitals, believing its heat would nourish growth. Others mixed crushed earthworms with jujube oil, and applied it directly, with hope and pain, but the strangest of all, small sticks, used to strike the penis, not out of punishment, but to stimulate blood flow, to provoke sighs. These weren't jokes, they were real methods, found in preserved texts, copied again and again. Behind the absurdity lies something very human, insecurity, longing, the fear of being not enough. Even in the absence of mirrors or magazines, the shadow of the ideal man loomed over medieval minds, and so they turned to whatever they could: milk, leaves, pain, and prayer, because in the Middle Ages sex wasn't just physical, it was mystical, terrifying, secret, and strange. If too much sex was considered a sin, then too little was seen by some as a disease. In the Middle Ages, doctors believed that semen wasn't just a reproductive fluid, it was a vital essence, a kind of inner fire. And when that fire was trapped for too long, it burned the body from within. Young men who abstained too long were said to suffer from headaches. nervous tremors, insomnia, even hallucinations. The cure was simple. Let the essence out one way or another, and when that wasn't possible they bled them. Literally. Doctors would slice open a vein to release the pressure, not from lust, but from heat. From the belief that unreleased semen rose like steam and poisoned the brain. And it didn't stop there. Crying was encouraged. So was sweating. Weeping and sweating were forms of moral release when sex was forbidden. Strange. But in the logic of the time it made perfect sense. In more severe cases, physicians permitted masturbation, but only as a medical necessity, a desperate measure for those unable to find a wife, or forbidden by vow to ever know one. And for women, the rules were even stranger. They too were believed to produce a reproductive fluid, a kind of female seed. If not released regularly through sex, this seed was said to rot the womb, to cause dizziness, madness, suffocation. Doctors called it hystericapatio, or simply uterine suffocation. A woman might faint in the field, cry uncontrollably, or lash out without reason. The diagnosis was always the same. Too much essence trapped inside. The cure: marriage, regular intercourse, and only in the missionary position, the one blessed by the church. Any other form was heresy, or worse, indulgence. But what if the woman could not marry, or refuse? Then came the treatment: vinegar douches, bitter herbs, strict diets to dry the womb, and in some cases stimulation by a midwife or healer, done not for pleasure, but to save her life. To modern minds it sounds like cruelty disguised as care. But in medieval thought the body and soul were always entangled. One could sicken the other. And so sex or its absence became more than biology. It became theology, philosophy, fear. A silent war between instinct and salvation. In the Middle Ages, even sex within marriage could become a sin. Only one position was accepted by the church: the missionary. Anything else was viewed as indulgent or unnatural. Pleasure without the goal of conception was forbidden. Touching your spouse too long, whispering words of desire, even looking with lust, all could be cause for confession. One of the strangest cases came from a church manual called the Corrector. A woman was said to knead bread dough on her bare buttocks. She then baked it and fed it to her husband. The goal was to make him desire her uncontrollably. The church called it a form of witchcraft. The punishment was 2 years of penance. This was not an isolated rule. There were pages of sins related to sex: how you moved, what you said, even what you imagined. Punishments depended on your status. A peasant might fast for days, a noble for months. A priest could be exiled or defrocked. These strange laws were not just about morality. They were about control. By ruling the bedroom, the church ruled the soul. In medieval society, a wife had no right to refuse her husband. Marriage meant duty, especially in the bedroom. But Marjorie Kemp was different. She was not a nun, not a noblewoman. She was a mother from East Anglia with 14 children. One day, she told her husband she wanted to live in celibacy, to give herself completely to God. Her husband was stunned. He asked, "Would you rather see me slain than lie with me again?" She answered, "I would rather see you slain." Instead of leaving her, he agreed. but only under 3 conditions. She must pay his debts, she must eat with him on Fridays, and she must remain part of his daily life. Together they signed a quiet pact. A medieval woman claiming the right to her own body, within marriage, within faith. The church did not support her, society did not praise her. But still she endured. Marjorie's story was rare, but it proved something powerful, even in the darkest times. Some women carved their own paths, and in doing so, they left behind more than history. They left a spark of resistance, of autonomy, of the quiet, sacred right to say no. In the Middle Ages, not all love was meant to be touched. From the courts of France came a new idea, courtly love. It was love from afar, between a knight and a lady, often a married lady. He would fight for her, sing for her, dream of her, but never touch her. It was about longing, restraint, devotion without reward. The man obeyed, the woman inspired. Their love was pure and painful. Writers called it noble, poets called it holy, but it was rarely real. Still, it changed how people saw love. Not just duty, not just sex, but something deeper. A heart that burned quietly, forever waiting, never having. In medieval times, virginity was not just about the body. It was about the soul. A girl could be called impure for a single thought. Even a dream could be a sin. The church taught that true purity meant no desire, not in action, not in mind. Once lost, it could only be restored through deep repentance, or in rare cases through divine grace. Marjorie Kemp believed God made her a virgin again. After 14 children, after a full marriage, she was told she would enter heaven pure. Others chose pain. Some threw themselves into thorn bushes. Others jumped into freezing rivers. A few even castrated themselves. To them, suffering was the only way back to innocence. Virginity became more than a state. It became a burden, a shadow, a crown made of fire. Sex in the Middle Ages was not just about sin or virtue. It was about power, about fear, about survival. Doctors called it medicine. The church called it temptation. The body called it need. People lived between those voices, torn by desire, crushed by guilt, searching for meaning in silence. Behind the rules were human hearts, longing, suffering, hoping to be good, but unable to forget they were still flesh. So if today's story made you pause, made you wonder, made you feel, tell us in the comments, because history is full of questions, and some of them are still ours. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next video.